In the ancient port city of Jeddah, on the shores of the Red Sea, a diplomatic chess match with global implications is about to unfold. For 10 days, Ukraine has weathered what many describe as Donald Trump's diplomatic wrath, following a contentious meeting in the Oval Office. Now, as missiles rain down on Kyiv and Russian forces, bolstered by North Korean soldiers, push to reclaim territory, American and Ukrainian delegations prepare for a summit that could reshape the course of the three-year war. One meeting, two nations, three leaders with competing agendas, and millions of lives hanging in the balance. As one Ukrainian official ominously warns, if these talks collapse, there may not be another chance. On March 11, 2025, delegations from the United States and Ukraine will convene in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, for what American officials describe as an effort to create a framework for a peace agreement and an initial ceasefire in the devastating conflict with Russia. The meeting comes at a critical juncture. Russia is escalating military pressure with intensified drone and missile strikes on Ukrainian cities, while simultaneously working with North Korean forces to dislodge Ukrainian troops from the Russian region of Kursk, which Ukraine captured in a surprising offensive last year. For Ukraine, this meeting represents both opportunity and peril. President Volodymyr Zelensky's government hopes to secure American support for its defensive capabilities and territorial integrity. Yet there are deep concerns in Kyiv that the summit could instead become a venue where Ukraine is pressured to accept terms favorable to Moscow. For the Trump administration, eager to declare a foreign policy victory, the meeting offers a chance to broker what the president has repeatedly called a deal, though the specifics of what America envisions remain largely unclear. Beyond the immediate battlefield implications, these negotiations have already sent tremors through global financial markets, reshaping investment patterns across Europe and affecting everything from defense stocks to currency values. In this documentary, we'll examine the key players, their objectives, the potential outcomes, and what this critical summit means for global security and economic stability in the years ahead. The roots of the current diplomatic moment stretch back to February 2022, when Russian forces launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine, a dramatic escalation of hostilities that had simmered since Russia's 2014 annexation of Crimea. Initially expected by Moscow to be a swift campaign resulting in regime change, the war instead evolved into a prolonged conflict with shifting front lines, enormous casualties, and profound economic consequences for both countries and the wider world. For the first 2 years of the war, Ukraine enjoyed substantial Western military support, allowing its forces to repel the initial Russian thrust toward Kyiv, and even reclaim significant territory in counteroffensives. The United States alone has provided approximately $80 billion in military, economic, and humanitarian assistance, while European allies contributed substantial aid packages of their own. This support enabled Ukraine to maintain its defensive posture despite Russia's significantly larger military and industrial capacity. The calculus changed dramatically with Donald Trump's return to the White House. Throughout his campaign, Trump promised to end the war quickly, though he offered few specifics on how he would accomplish this goal. His skepticism about continued American support for Ukraine was well documented, and many analysts predicted a significant shift in U.S. policy following his inauguration. That shift has materialized more rapidly and dramatically than many expected. The relationship between the Trump and Zelensky administrations deteriorated sharply following what sources describe as a contentious meeting in the Oval Office in late February 2025. In that meeting, Trump reportedly criticized Zelensky harshly for not pursuing peace negotiations more aggressively. Days after this encounter, Trump publicly stated, "I'm finding it more difficult, frankly, to deal with Ukraine. In terms of getting a final settlement, it may be easier dealing with Russia." Shortly thereafter, the United States curtailed intelligence sharing with Ukraine, a critical blow to the country's defensive capabilities. As American support wavered, Ukrainian forces began losing ground, particularly in the Kursk region of Russia that they had seized in a surprise offensive in 2023. The presence of North Korean troops fighting alongside Russian forces further complicated Ukraine's military position, stretching its already limited resources across multiple fronts. These developments have substantially weakened Ukraine's negotiating position heading into the Jeddah talks. The American delegation arriving in Jeddah represents the core of Trump's foreign policy team. Secretary of State Marco Rubio and National Security Advisor Mike Waltz will participate, bringing both diplomatic and military expertise to the table. However, most analysts believe the real negotiating authority rests with Steve Witkoff, a trusted Trump confidant who has emerged as the president's personal envoy for sensitive international matters. Witkoff recently met with Vladimir Putin directly and has been handling similarly delicate negotiations in the Middle East, a dual role that underscores his significance within Trump's foreign policy apparatus. Ukraine's delegation will be led by Andriy Yermak, President Zelensky's closest aide and a powerful behind-the-scenes figure in Kyiv. He'll be joined by Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha, Defense Minister Rustem Umerov, and military aide Pavlo Palisa. This team represents Ukraine's diplomatic and security establishment, though sources note that all are considered loyal to Yermak, potentially limiting internal disagreement during the negotiations. Notably, President Zelensky himself will be in Riyadh, the Saudi capital, on Monday, a circumstance Ukrainian officials insist is coincidental, but which has fueled speculation about potential parallel discussions. The dynamics between these delegations are complicated by personal factors. Yermak is reportedly unpopular with Trump's team, potentially hampering direct communication. Meanwhile, Britain and France have stepped into intermediary roles between Washington and Kiev, helping shape Ukraine's negotiating strategy and providing diplomatic channels when direct communication falters. This triangular diplomatic arrangement reflects the deteriorating trust between American and Ukrainian officials. Trump is trying to keep Ukraine on a short leash because he wants them to accept whatever peace he can get. The Ukrainians are the obstacle because they're not surrendering. Ukraine approaches the Jeddah summit with several clear objectives that have been developed in consultation with European allies. At a minimum, the Zelensky government hopes to sign a framework for joint American-Ukrainian mineral development, a potential economic incentive for continued American engagement. On March 7, Zelensky also proposed an air and naval ceasefire, a tactical suggestion aimed at putting pressure on Russia to engage constructively. According to Western officials familiar with Ukraine's strategy, this proposal is designed to create the impression that Ukraine is ready to engage with Trump's peace initiatives, while shifting responsibility to Moscow for any rejection. More fundamentally, Ukraine will likely insist on several non-negotiable conditions for any sustainable peace. These include rejecting any agreement that would limit Ukraine's ability to rearm in the future, refusing to legally recognize occupied territory as legitimately Russian, and resisting any interference in Ukrainian domestic politics, such as demands for elections while the country remains under martial law. Perhaps most critically, Ukraine will continue to seek security guarantees from the United States, though analysts consider significant progress on this front unlikely given Trump's well-documented skepticism of international security commitments. Russia's objectives are more opaque but potentially more straightforward. According to sources close to the Kremlin, Moscow will likely demand a Ukrainian declaration of neutrality, effectively ending any prospect of NATO membership, and insist that foreign peacekeepers be excluded from any settlement. These conditions would be extraordinarily difficult for Ukraine to accept, particularly in the absence of robust security guarantees from Western powers. The timing of this summit, as Russian forces advance on multiple fronts, suggests Moscow believes it can secure more favorable terms through continued military pressure than through good faith negotiation. the American objectives remain the greatest unknown factor. Publicly, the Trump administration has stated that it seeks a framework for peace and an initial ceasefire. However, former officials familiar with Trump's approach to Ukraine suggest that his primary goal may be to secure a deal, almost any deal, that he can present as a foreign policy achievement. On March 7, Trump did threaten to impose major sanctions on Russia, suggesting some willingness to pressure Moscow. However, his subsequent criticism of Ukraine and apparent sympathy for Putin's position have raised questions about his ultimate intentions. They'll say, "We can't agree to that, but let's do something else." Putin is smart enough not to just say no. The world watches and waits.